Today, my dad and I are here at Chickamauga Battlefield in North Georgia, and we're here to attend a ranger-guided program to learn all about Reconstruction after the Civil War. That's coming up next.
Battle of Chickamauga began in deadly earnest on the morning of September 19, 1863. First shots had been fired the day before. And the battle had started out as a small engagement that rapidly spread through the area we're at now on and further off to the southwest by the end of the day. Before there was one final flare-up in this sector of the battlefield on the evening of September 19th, and that fell into the sector, the corps of Confederate Acting Lieutenant General Daniel Harvey Hill. D.H. Hill was one of the few generals on this battlefield who could honestly be said wanted to be on this field to kill Yankees. D.H. Hill even said that, although a deeply religious man, he did say that if he had one flaw in his character, it was the fact that he says his love of God was as fierce as his hatred of Yankees. So gives you an idea. And D.H. Hill is a fascinating individual because of just for being the contrast that he is. Daniel Harvey Hill is really ultimately a blend, a little ball made up of sarcasm and pessimism, all rolled up together. D.H. Hill was a North Carolinian. He had obtained an appointment to West Point. Graduating from there, he fought in the Mexican War, actually serving in the same artillery unit with George Thomas and Braxton Bragg. After the war, though, like many officers, he resigns from the Army, finding chances of promotion were very limited, and he goes into education. He teaches at Washington College in Virginia, which becomes Washington and Lee, where he meets and marries a young lady whose sister happens to be married to a VMI professor by the name of Thomas Jonathan Jackson. Stonewall Jackson, he's Stonewall Jackson's brother-in-law. And he would, if you know anything about Jackson's reputation, Jackson has this reputation of being extremely religious, bordering on fanatical in his beliefs, and Hill would give him a run for the money in that sector. Hill, however, soon finds more employment, this time back in North Carolina at Davidson College, so he goes there. And then, right before the Civil War, North Carolina decides they need their own military school, which tended to be a big fad that was going across the country at that time. And so he is made the commandant of the North Carolina Military Institute. He is an outspoken secessionist, which is kind of unique in North Carolina. North Carolina being one of the last states to secede, but Hill's beating the drum for secession. And when it finally does come, he will recruit, raise, and train the 1st North Carolina and lead them as their colonel into Virginia in 1861, fighting at the first big land battle of the war, which wasn't Bull Run. It was Big Bethel, Virginia, down near Norfolk. And he quickly gets his name in the newspapers, quickly gets a reputation for his bravery on the battlefield, and quickly promoted to brigadier general. And he excels at this, and he's promoted yet again, this time to major general. By 1862, he commands one of Robert E. Lee's best fighting divisions. There's only one problem. Robert E. Lee can't stand it. D.H. Hill's personality is the problem. He's combative, he's argumentative, and part of the reason is that he's suffering from what we today, which is a slip disc. So he's always in pain. But mix that with his sense of self-righteousness, mix that with these other things. He fights with other officers, most notably even his own brother-in-law, Stonewall Jackson. He gets in the feuds with James Longstreet. He's constantly keeps things stirred up to the point that Robert E. Lee says that the harmony of the Army is threatened if Hill stays there. That his constant croaking would demoralize the entire army. And so, what do you think is done to Hill then? Something that's been done since the dawn of time.
Send him somewhere else.
You promote him out of the army. And so he's promoted and ultimately sent to Chattanooga to assume command of one of the corps in the Army of Tennessee, where they thought that reuniting him with his former commander and friend, Bragg, would be a good idea. The Army of Tennessee is the Charlie Brown Army of the American Civil War. Every time they think they're going to get to kick the football, it gets yanked out from under them, and this is no different of a case. You end up now with Harvey Hill out here, and Harvey Hill is going to make a name for himself in the Army of Tennessee. Just not a good one. The hero, a few days prior to the battle here at Chickamauga, Bragg had a chance to destroy part of the Union Army of the Cumberland, ironically commanded by their good friend George Thomas, in a place called Macklemore's Cove. Perfect situation. They had a force blocking the Union advance. Bragg had a force to the north ready to come and pounce down on them, crushing the forces between the two halves. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Harvey Hill showed timidity. He doesn't attack. He gives excuses of why this shouldn't happen. And Bragg sees a golden opportunity slip through his fingers to then play out here on the Chickamauga Battlefield as well. Although Hill will be aggressive on September 19th, in the morning of September 20th, when he's supposed to kick off an attack at dawn, he will later say he never got the orders. Probably some strong evidence that he didn't, but the problem arises that upon getting the orders finally to attack, he comes up with excuses of why the attack shouldn't be made and delays the attack even further, giving Union troops near tour stop number 2 time to barricade their positions, get reinforced, and get ready. And finally, when Hill's been attacked, they're beaten back with heavy losses. And that, after the Battle of Chickamauga, Hill will still be keeping stirring brewing. He'll be involved in a almost near mutiny that occurs to try to remove Bragg from command of the army. And then after that, it's done. Hill is removed from command, placed pretty much on a shelf back over in Raleigh, and never comes into the field until the very last days of the war. So Daniel Harvey Hill here comes home at the end of the war, to no parades, to no celebration. He's facing, like many other Confederate soldiers coming home, devastation, a lost generation, a lost way of life in his mind. Leaders thought that their cause was righteous, that God was on their side, particularly in his case. And how do you now reconcile that? You went into this war, D.H. Hill did, with firm commitment and belief that God was on their side, and they lost. How do you deal with that? That's the dilemma. Because you'd have to admit God wasn't on your side if therefore you lost. How do you then keep your head held high? How do you keep your honor? What do you have to do? You have to craft it now. You have to pitch it that you never had a chance of winning to begin with. This was a fight against the odds. This is now, at the same time Hill is wrestling with this, a newspaper editor in Richmond, Virginia by the name of Edward Pollard publishes a book called The Lost Cause. That will set the standard. It has a few things you should know about the Lost Cause. It has several tenets. Robert E. Lee, is a character, a marble man. He is perfect. There's nothing, Lee was the best general there ever lived or breathed. He was the best man that ever lived on the North American continent, and that's what they're holding in this belief. And the villain is James Longstreet, another general that fought on this battlefield. If it wasn't for James Longstreet, the Confederacy would have won the war. But Longstreet didn't do what he was supposed to at Gettysburg, and they lost. The war wasn't about slavery. It was all about constitutional principles. And we couldn't win this war to begin with. We fought the North out of a sense of duty. That's what all is encompassed in the idea of the lost cause. But the biggest tenet is Robert E. Lee is perfect. However, there starts being some schisms. Hill, in 1866, starts publishing a newspaper called, a little magazine actually called The Land We Love. And it's going to be his attempt at trying to put his imprint onto all of this. The Land We Love was to be devoted to literature, military history, and agriculture. Now that's a blend. Ultimately started publication in 1866, and by 1867 it claimed 12,000 subscribers in 32 states. And it will be through this that Hill starts then making his mark on the idea of the lost cause. Arguing, first of all, though, to him, the lost cause becomes something personal, because he starts receiving criticism for what happened here at Chickamauga, but also for another incident in his career. That was right before the Battle of Antietam, the Battle of Sharpsburg, as he would have called it. There was a set of Robert E. Lee's orders sent out, and they got lost. They were his set of orders. And Edward Pollard and the lost cause blamed Hill. Because again, Robert E. Lee's perfect. How come Robert E. Lee lost the Battle of Antietam? It wasn't Robert E. Lee's fault. It's Harvey Hill's fault. Robert E. Lee was perfect. He didn't lose the Battle of Gettysburg. Whose fault was it that he lost Gettysburg? Longstreet. You get the idea how this works. So Hill now, a man who's starting to become a proponent of the lost cause, now starts finding himself a target of it. So it's going to become a little bit interesting. He's now going to take his claim and run with his magazine. He's going to start making public speeches. He's also going to become involved with another newspaper called the Southern Home Front and start really trying to put his stamp on things while criticizing Pollard for what Pollard is saying, and then trying to extricate himself and keep clear his good name. Hill's going to be a piece of work. As the Reconstruction era begins, he will take an editorial in the Land We Love. When he hears about the rise of the radical Republicans, it means military domination, garrisons of soldiers everywhere, unequal taxation, favoring the rich and grinding the poor. It means the persecution of all times of as brave and noble people as the sun ever shone upon. It means the total destruction of all the products of the South, upon which the prosperity of the whole nation depends. It means the erection of a huge centralized despotism. It means intolerance in all things, crushing of all semblance of opposition in speech and through to the party of great moral ideas. He'll continue his anti-union sentiment there, and also still try to extricate, clear himself of all of these issues that seem to be haunting him. But he'll defend himself on Chickamauga and actually start being able to distance him. And that's where I talked about earlier how we've always been haunted at this battlefield by a little bit of Daniel Harvey Hill's lost cause rhetoric. And that is that, and even in our old movie, the orders he received from Bragg were garbled. Nobody could understand what those orders were. And so that's why he didn't attack at Macklemore's Cove. He didn't understand the orders. And that's kind of got adopted. But when you go and look at the orders that Bragg gave, they're pretty clear and straightforward. They say attack. And Hill found wiggle room in that simple order. But he tries to clear himself about Antietam, and he says he never received the orders in one case. He tries to justify it. Then he goes and says, well, we may have lost there, but boy, we did a bang-up job the day before at South Mountain, which he did do. His division fought strongly at South Mountain and did really well there. But he tries to shift things from Antietam to South Mountain now. Said, well, didn't do too good there, but boy, we did a bang-up job there at South Mountain. But he still can't ever get away from that. And he bitterly then begins he even writes a letter to Longstreet. Remember, I said earlier, the two of them hadn't got along too well during the war, but now both of them are being hammered by this idea of the lost cause. And he addressed Longstreet. He says, the Virginians, in order to glorify Lee, assume that that he would have conquered a peace. But for my carelessness, he bitterly complains. So he's starting to feel a little bit of resentment toward Lee. The vanity of the Virginians has made them glorify their own prowess and to deify Lee. They've made me the scapegoat of Maryland and you of Pennsylvania. So you see how he's starting now to start getting resistance. But he's not without his detractors. Some of his old staff and some of his old colleagues will come to his defense. But he'll keep on dealing with this for quite some time. But will still make an impact. He really starts hammering home the deal of the Confederate soldier being the best soldiers that ever existed in the world, and that the only reason they didn't win this war is that they were outnumbered by too great of odds, and there was no possible way they could have ever won. And he keeps hammering that home. So he does still that, although he does get pretty beat up in the fight, especially after one point when he finally gives out in a couple of public speeches. He lashes out and states, my impression of General Lee is not so enthusiastic as those of most men who served under him. That doesn't sit too well. And then finally, in the Century newspapers of what becomes Battles and Leaders, he writes an article about the Battle of Malvern Hill, and he noted in that article that that Lee's orders that day to attack, it was not war, it was murder. And of course, though, what is Robert E. Lee? Robert E. Lee's perfect. And so Hill's going to be somewhat marginalized after that. And so he had been a guy who had really extolled the fighting power of the Confederate soldier, but he then befalls a victim of the lost cause, which in an attempt to raise and deify Lee, they had to have someone to blame for Antietam, and he can't shake that. And then he even makes it worse when he then turns around and criticizes Lee. Not as harshly as Longstreet would do, but still he criticizes Lee, and then after that Hill's reputation is kind of on a downward slide, and he kind of will fall from the forefront of the lost cause, although he will be a advocate of it till the day he dies.